Greetings, Roger.
Hello again. Good to see you.
Still looking very dapper. I want to take you to the Sea of Galilee. So we're going to leave Jerusalem in the south. We've gone north. We're up at the Sea of Galilee. And we're actually at the second Passover in the book of John. So we've moved on a full year from when we were at the temple and Jesus kicked all the money changers out. So we're at Passover number 2. It's a time when the whole nation's focus is on being fed because of the famous Passover meal when the lamb is killed, so that in fact God will pass over and not kill the firstborn. So it's a point of massive religious importance. It's the major ceremony for the whole of the year. And where is Jesus? He's up at the Sea of Galilee. So last time he showed that the religious leaders don't even know God. Now we're actually going to say, actually, who can really provide for us? Is it the religious system of the temple and the religious priesthood, or is it actually going to come more directly from Jesus, the Son of God? Let's go find out. We're going to start, Rog. Sorry, I should have said this before I flipped over. To get this clear, I want to take us right back into the book of Exodus. So we're back in the time of Moses, and this will help us because we'll then see how this sits with what Jesus does. So we're back in the wilderness. We're in about 1450 BC, roughly. I mean, pretty roughly. And we can actually see exactly what's going on between Moses and God and the people.
Right, Exodus 16. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening, you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord.
So very telling. The people of Israel have actually been saved from Egypt. They've been set free. They're now in the desert. They're in the wilderness. And actually, there's a lot of mumbling and grumbling going on. You know, we tend to think, oh, they must have all been God followers. Well, not sure, actually. No. So actually, what's happened is they've left God out of the picture and they're saying to Moses, what have you done? You've led us out here. We're in the middle of nowhere. This is a disaster. Grumble, 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 grumble. And actually, what's happening? They're completely ignoring. It's not Moses on it. It's God. And God is supplying their needs. And I love this story. Look at that picture on verse 5. The food lasts for 1 day in verse 4. You have to eat it and then it's gone. But on the 6th day, they actually can go out and get twice as much. And now that food lasts for 2 days. Now, so in other words, it's special food. It doesn't rot the way that the others do. Now, the reason I particularly say this is a great story later on in Exodus where some of the people think, aha, clever. If we collect this stuff twice as much on a normal day, we don't have to go out tomorrow. And actually, no, because the food that is the other days rots off immediately. God's providing. He knows what they need. And so that they don't have to work on the Sabbath, the bread they get the day before lasts 2 days. God's in control. So here Moses is making it abundantly clear and saying, look, careful who you're grumbling against, because you're actually grumbling against the Lord. So let's set the scene. Moses is with the people of Israel in the wilderness around 1450 BC, after God has rescued them from slavery in the land of Egypt. What is the miracle all about? Miraculous food provided by God. And it's a test of obedience as well. It shows God's glory, who he is, that they're going out obediently every day to collect his provision that he's given them. But there is a lot of grumbling. We need to take that on board. All of these are themes we will actually see as we now go back into chapter 6 of John. Let's flip over. Back in John.
Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing those who were ill. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near.
So we might not have recorded in John lots of miracles. Luke, for example, does. Luke has written a history, and his pages are full of miracles that were clearly being done every day. Well, you would expect that probably was happening, wasn't it? I mean, you can imagine that Jesus walked into a town and the hospital emptied because everybody actually brought their relatives to be healed by Jesus. But here, the message is very clear that that is exactly what is going on. Verse 2, a great crowd are following him. Why? Because they had seen the signs or heard of them as he has been healing those who were ill. So he's attracted a massive crowd, even out here. And Jesus has gone up the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. So they followed him a long way. They haven't just gone to the local stadium. They're out into the hillsides, into the mountainsides. And the Jewish Passover festival was near. So we've got our measure for when this is happening. So let's have a read on the right-hand side. Jesus is on the move again, up in the north of Israel. There's a great crowd following him, amazed by the miracles they have seen. When does this take place? It's at the time of the Passover festival. As we've seen, Passover remembered God sparing his people from his judgment when he rescued them from Egypt. For the Jews, this was a time to focus on being rescued, being right with God, and God miraculously feeding them in the wilderness. So the scene is set. Let's go over.
When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?"
It's a great picture, this, isn't it? So Jesus says, "Okay, boys, now how do you think we're going to get out of this one? Where should we buy bread for those people to eat?" So he knows the answer. He's actually going to he is pointing out to his disciples the hopelessness of the situation. They're up a mountainside. There's not some local sandwich truck. They are literally in the middle of nowhere. And Philip's answer, I love the detail. Well, just to give them a bite would cost half a salary for a year. And then I love Andrew. Well, I might have got the answer, boys. I've got 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. And you can tell him, we're sunk. There's no way in God's green earth that we're going to get 2 small fish and 5 small barley loaves to feed this lot. We're absolutely sunk. Right, let's make sure I've got this right with the side on the right-hand side. A situation is developing. I think that's quite polite. The people need food, but it would take 6 months' salary to buy 1 bite of bread each for this many. Jesus knows what is about to happen. This is a test to teach his disciples something much more important than where to buy lunch. What's the disciples' solution? Well, it looks like a disaster. All they have found is a boys' packed lunch. What can Jesus do with so little? Over we go.
Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten.
Now, I want to put you back into the court, please, because I've often sat through, I remember this happening at school, actually. Oh, well, this was a great story about the sharing of packed lunches. You know, Jesus showed the way. He took one small boy's lunch and he shared that. And then everybody, oh, that's a good idea. So they all shared their packed lunches. Yeah. Well, I think we need to look at the evidence. So let's take this piece by piece. Now, for a start, did you notice in verse 10, only the men are counted? So presumably the wives were there, the kids were there. So the crowd is way, way, way bigger than 5,000 men. Mm. I mean, I don't know what the number would have been, but I mean, perhaps it was 20,000. Okay, it's a huge crowd. That's the picture. It's massive. It certainly is more than 5 little loaves and a couple of little fish are going to feed. Jesus then took the loaves. So he's taken the 5 small loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. Well, verse 10 told us he just told the entire lot to sit down. So he's addressing not the people just sitting around, he's addressing the hill, the mountainside. He did the same with the fish. What were the fish? 2 small fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. And here's the killer blow for the evidence. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. He's taught. So that number of people were fed by 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And the scraps left from those 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish filled 12 baskets. Pretty clear, isn't it? Now, let's go back. Imagine this huge crowd. John has told us there are 5,000 men, plus presumably women and children, out in the middle of nowhere and getting hungry. What does Jesus do? Well, with no fuss, he simply takes the boys' food and passes it around to the whole crowd, and everyone gets enough to eat. Astonishingly, when the crowd has finished eating, the disciples pick up leftovers that fill 12 baskets from just 5 small loaves. This is a huge, undeniable miracle. The people don't just have enough to eat. They have so much, they can't finish it all. Jesus' provision for these people is absolutely extraordinary. It's a miracle. But there's even more to even that, actually.
Can I come in here? Do you get cynics, Richard, at this moment saying, I just can't believe this, and where did those baskets come from? And do you get this sort of reaction at all? Or?
Actually, it's very difficult to argue with what it says. So you are right in using the word a cynic. It might be that someone goes, I'm really struggling with this. I'm going, well, fine. My job is just to take you through what is written here. What you've got to decide is, are you about to tell me that part of the evidence you don't think is true, even though everything else that you've seen in the book, we've already said that's clearly a language of truth. So are we actually going to reject a miracle just because we can't get our head around it? Or are we actually accepting Jesus is the Son of God? He is the creator of the universe. And frankly, if he wants to take 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish and feed 20,000 people, he can. Yep, so store it away. I'm not asking you not to be cynical. I'm asking you to write it down as if you were doing a plus and minus list as you go through, and you've got to make your own conclusion. Do you remember that comedian, the Irish comedian, what's his name? Dave Allen, for those who are old enough to remember. He used to finish and say, may your God go with you. Yeah. Well, at the end of this, it's not between me. You don't have to convince me. It's your relationship with God that is going to count, and you're going to have to weigh up. Have you seen enough evidence that actually does convince you Jesus is the Son of God? If you have, you can't just, it's very dangerous to just say, well, I've seen the evidence, tick the box. I theoretically have decided that Jesus is the Son of God. Now I'm going to get on with the rest of my life. Because either that evidence has convinced you that actually what he's offering you is the enormity of eternal life with him, an empowered, peace-soaked, loving relationship with him, in which case you have chosen to honor the Son. And by honoring the Son, you are made right with God. There's no grey middle ground. And that's going to be true about this miracle. You can't park the miracle. I mean, unfortunately, liberal theologians for years have gone, oh, no, I can't really accept it. We're far too sophisticated today. Well, I'm sorry, but you can't divide it out.
Yeah, and I think also, Richard, I agree with all you've said. I think also once you trust, once you honor the Son, then miracles like this don't seem that difficult for the Lord to do they?
If he's the creator God, of course he can take 5 small loaves and 2 small fish and feed 20,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just looked at Exodus. God the Father took the entire nation of Israel, parked them in the desert, and created from nothing so that it fell from the sky loaves of bread, which, by the way, he made sure wouldn't last more than one day, except on one day of the week when he didn't want them to go out the next day, and then it lasted 2 days. I mean, by the way, he gave them in the desert, he gave them water from solid rock. So yes, he's God. He's not, I'm not following some world leader who's just a human bod. I'm following the fact that God has broken into humanity, broken into the history of our planet as a human being, the Son of God, so that actually I can understand this and have a relationship with my Heavenly Father. It's not separable, is it?
No, I'm with you.
Right, thanks very much. Let's move on. Good questions. Keep going like that. So I actually would ask you to read this. What does this miracle mean?
So let's think back to the verses from Exodus 16 that we read at the start of the episode. There are lots of similarities with what Jesus has just done. Both happen against the background of Passover and in the wilderness. Both focus on the miraculous provision of food. Both reveal the glory of the one doing the miracle. Both are set up as a test. In the Exodus, God revealed his character to his people. He showed himself to be the God who rescues and rules. The comparison with the Exodus shows us that the miracle is about much more than Jesus being a nice man who wants people to have lunch.
So as the thing says, the little sign on the right says, this sign actually points to a mind-blowing reality. Jesus is proving to be the God of the Exodus. So when you start getting your head around that, exactly what you just said over the page, actually, well, he probably could do this thing, couldn't he? I mean, by the way, he didn't just make this planet. He made the entire universe. So can he take 5 small loaves and 2 small fish and feed 20,000 people? Well, I think he probably can.
Probably can, yes.
Right, thank you. Let's go over.
After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew himself again to a mountain by himself.
So as I was saying earlier, the evidence is in the text. And what we see here is what was the reaction of that crowd? 5,000 men, could be 20,000 in its entirety. What did they do? Well, they clearly believed that 5 small loaves and 2 small fish have just fed the entire bunch, because they say after the people saw the sign Jesus performed. Now, I'd suggest to you, if that hadn't happened and they'd only just shared their lunches, they wouldn't be thinking that, would they? Where's the miracle in that? They say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. This is exactly, it's the linkage back to the person that is always described as the prophet in the Old Testament is Moses. So there's this linkage back, as promised that one like Moses would come. This is the Messiah. He's come into the world. And what do they want to do? Well, they want to make him king. They are a people under the rule of the Romans. They love the idea that at long last, the savior of the Jews has pitched up. Presumably, if we make him king, he'll get rid of the Romans. We will be back into our great days of being a completely independent people. And Jesus knows that's what they're thinking. Now, I would suggest to you that a human leader would go down that road.
Yes.
I've done something spectacular, therefore you should make me king. Jesus, knowing they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew.
Mm.
He leaves them all. He goes up the mountain by himself. Now, isn't that interesting? It's 180 degrees different again from what mankind would do. Right, well, let's read the right-hand side. The people think they get it. They've been waiting for another prophet like Moses for thousands of years, and they think Jesus is the one. But what does Jesus do? He simply walks away from the political ambitions of the people. Why did Jesus walk away? The people were desperate to overthrow their Roman rulers. But Jesus didn't come to get rid of the Romans. He had come for something much bigger. He knew what the plan was. Now, was it a great plan that would see him sitting in glory in terms of overseeing all the worldly things of the Jews? No, it was way bigger than that. But it was going to come at an enormous cost. It wasn't a throne in the way that we would put someone on it as a king. It was a cross so that he would pay a price that we could not pay. And from that cross would come the victory that he would actually sit on the throne for all eternity, so that people like you and I 2,000 years later can view him as our savior. What a picture. He sees the reality of what he must do. They didn't.
Yeah.
Right, let's go on. Please take us through the summary.
So Jesus provides a miraculous lunch, which points to who he is. It's Passover, and Jesus is in the middle of nowhere with a huge crowd. Verse 2, a great crowd of people followed him. The people are hungry, and there's no food except for one boy's packed lunch. Verse 9, how far will they go? Will they go among so many? But it's no problem for Jesus. He creates so much food that there are 12 baskets of leftovers, all from 5 little loaves. Verse 12, when they had all had enough to eat. And then Jesus' miracle is very similar to God's provision of food as he rescued his people from Egypt. Jesus wants people to see what he is doing and what only God can do. Verse 14, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. And then the people want to make Jesus their political leader, but that is not why he has come. He withdraws from the crowd's praise. Verse 15, Jesus withdrew again to a mountain by himself.
And if we flip over, we get all these verses again for us to look at and to consider. What comes next? So who is Jesus exactly? The crowd's going to have to deal with this issue. And actually, also, the disciples are going to get a lesson in just who Jesus really is. Well, thanks for enjoying episode 13 with me. I hope you're absolutely hooked to find out what happens next.
I am.
Great. Well, I hope others are watching this as well, and that they will come back and join you and I as we look at episode 14. Thanks very much for being with us.
Yeah.